lot of the clients that we work with are SaaS companies that are selling their software application globally. Or if they're not, they're certainly looking at international expansion as a lever on growth. And increasingly, as they bring payments to bear as a revenue stream and a native capability of their applications, a big part or a big friction point of expanding internationally is figuring out the payments piece, the regulatory environment, the operational piece, the partnerships that they need to work with. And so it certainly created an opportunity for payment companies that say, hey, look, you're going to partner with us. And as you expand globally, payments is not something you're going to have to figure out in these separate fiefdoms. One point of integration to us, and we're going to allow you to sell payment acceptance as a core part of your application around the world. I think that's the vision. The reality is we got a long way to go before that's true universally. And so I think what's driving international for us, which might be a little bit different from other merchant processors, is that our partners are software applications. And software is easy to sell across, at least easier to sell than payments across international boundaries. And payments becomes the sticking point for them.
The thing that's most staggering to me, what really woke me up, was when we were in Indonesia a few years ago. And I was doing some research to prepare for the meeting with the payment facilitator and the bank. And I found out that in Indonesia, there's more than 250 million people and 55 million small businesses. And I know that we were looking at the Indian case study, and that's the biggest one in the world right now. They're going to have some double-digit percentage of the world's merchants, if they don't already. But Indonesia, and there's so many craftspeople, and when you double-click on that and you look at and figure out that as you include people into the financial system, these are Indonesian merchants selling largely to Indonesian people, also some internationally if they can, and you double-click on it and you say, well, okay, you start to include these people, these small business people, into the economy, and what happens? Well, it brings the poor into the middle class. It brings women into the economy who may not have other opportunities to be in the economy. And we saw this in sub-Saharan Africa, and we saw this in Egypt. 100 million people, unbelievable economy, and 3% electronic. And so when you look at that and you think, oh, well, is growth slowing? Some of the slides from this morning, we got a long way to go. That's my big bang that I'd take away from what's happening globally.
Actually, I think to answer that question, I'm going to go backwards a little bit, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the impetus in terms of what we're doing, because I think our perspective is a little bit different in terms of why we're trying to do what we're doing. It all comes down to, at the end of the day, Ajay, our CEO, announced to us a very large number in terms of what he expected the network to look like in very short order. I think you could hear gnashing of teeth and a few folks wailing in various regions, but rather rapidly we had to sort of figure out how we were going to do that. And at the end of the day, the number doesn't really matter. What actually matters is that we were actually going to figure out, how do we get out of the BAU? How do we actually get out there and actually be more proactive, right? Up until this point, I think it's probably fair to say, the acquirers were doing the lifting, going out there, getting all, how does Mastercard get involved? And I don't want to ramble too much, but net, what we're looking at here is a few years back when we were trying to figure out how do we actually change the way we look at this and how do we actually get involved. It was, I'm trying to think, we had 688 registered payment facilitators. And they represented somewhere in the region of 15 to 18% of our net new growth. That doesn't sound like that much, but at the time it was eye-opening, right? It sort of indicated to us that there was a huge opportunity there. And that, in essence, was the impetus behind what we chose to do. Today it's, 1,576. That is as of yesterday. That sounds like a lot, sounds like a big difference, but in reality, it's quite small.
Half of those are Todd's clients, by the way. So half of those are Todd's clients.
Yeah, we probably took you there too. But the cool number, and actually Vikas in the panel kind of sort of alluded to it, 70% India. Globally, net new growth is PFs generate 68% of our net new growth.
Well, I'll take that one for a second, because one of the things you've got to remember is governments love their taxes. And what's a good way to increase the tax base? get more people into the formal economy out of the informal economy. So a really good GDP case can be made, a really good tax-based case can be made to bring these small businesses. And every government, I think every government, every country we go to, there's a conversation about a machine to count the sales tax at the formal merchants. They're having conversations about, I remember one of the Middle Eastern countries we went to, they were talking about the Instagrammers and could they have a special kind of license for the Instagrammers where it's not quite as rigorous a license for them to, they're doing something, they're registering with the government, but it's not quite as intrusive and doesn't have some of the same nationality rules and things like that.
Just to kind of bridge the two questions, Upwork, former kind of Elance, Odesk, has a whole bunch of micro businesses in the Philippines that are accepting electronic payments because they're using now Upwork as a platform by which they sell their wares. And I think it's those platforms that are going to increasingly look to ways to add greater value to both sides of the transaction. So it's no coincidence that Uber is now offering drivers financial auto loan products. So one way that you increase your driver base is you make it easier for people to get cars that they could drive on your network. It's no coincidence that Uber is now offering an Uber debit card, like a core banking product. Why get your debit card from Uber as opposed to Chase or Bank of America or anything else? Well, if you drive on Uber and you have an Uber debit card, you're going to get instant payouts at no additional cost. You're going to get a discount at the pump where it matters most. It's no coincidence that Shopify is now offering growth capital for small businesses. Because if you're already building your business on Shopify and you're using that as your inventory management and your e-commerce platform, it's a very natural place, and payments, it's a very natural place to now go for capital. So I think these platforms, I mentioned Uber as an example before, are doing a great job bringing small businesses into the fold for payments acceptance. That's one financial service, which I think very naturally lends itself as an on-ramp to other financial products as well. You accept payments, where are you going to deposit those payments? Is now the right time to open up a bank account, and can you do it through the software application that you're now using? You now need to close a cash flow gap because you're paying out your subcontractors before you're getting paid from your client. Well, you're using this invoicing platform to manage your receivables. Why not use them as a way to get additional capital? So I think what we see is the software platforms that we partner with to get distribution for payments acceptance to these small businesses are increasingly going to become kind of the frontier for a broader range of financial services beyond just payment acceptance.
Yeah, and it's got longevity, I think. I think that's an example. International, B2B, in the US healthcare, of course. These are areas that have a lot of longevity because there's a lot of friction in the markets. There's a lot of paper and ugly types of payments. So those are great bets to make, I think, for multi-year horizons.
I was going to say, it's not just about new verticals. It might even be in some what I would describe as the fundamental verticals that you need to light up a given market. So again, we talk a lot about the US, I guess, and a lot of what's going on in the developing markets, and everyone's interested in what's the new, the rental space or whatever it is. For us, I think as well, what we're trying to accomplish is identify the partners that are actually going to help us light up that market, actually get it going, to the extent that it might be some of the more everyday type verticals that you wouldn't necessarily be thinking about here. How do we light those up in a way that you get the issuing side of the house engaged, and it goes from the sort of high-end T&E type stuff into your everyday spend. So I think part of what we're trying to accomplish with what we're doing is in certain markets, how do we figure out how we bring more into the ecosystem, more the customers, the cardholders into the ecosystem, and how do we actually start from the beginning even, before we even start going. And to us, I think that's where, it isn't just a payment-centric approach, it can't be. And that's the value, I think, where you talk about PFs, ISVs, they come with solutions that are beyond payments, that will potentially drive someone who's, I'm going to make it up, like groceries. They're like, yeah, no, I'm happy with cash. Why would I ever do it? But now all of a sudden you've got a compelling proposition that includes payments, but actually adds a value to someone who is accustomed to cash all the time. So there's different levels of it, I think, and we're trying to sort of see the spectrum of it all.
So I think in the market, a few things had to happen. The first thing is the rules. Until there were rules in 2011, there were rules. There was some of this activity happening Rich, like you guys were doing this stuff. You were innovating this stuff before there were rules to talk about how you do it. So there had to be rules. And then there had to be at least one processor / bank that sort of got it and figured it out. And there were one or two, a couple of them for very large companies and one that really sort of put the stake in the ground. And then there had to be
You would say Vantive was the one that put the stake in the ground?
in the teens, yeah. And so Vantive did that. And then what you started to see is this awakening in 2016 or so of a lot of different processors and banks starting to take the program and put a program into place. And I think I do think that the last step on top of all of that, and it happened in it was building for about 3-4 years, but 2018 and 2019, you've got this tool set, this set of APIs, SaaS, et cetera, that binds all of that together. And there's a couple different approaches out there, but that, I think, now what we're seeing, and we would argue and I think some of our customers that have come on over the last year would say, now you really do have this it isn't fully marketed yet. It isn't understood out there, but I do think that managed like cloud services example is really, really powerful. And I think, having talked to clients that have been consulting clients for a few years, I think that it's your argument of if you told your board 10 years ago that you were going to use Google Cloud, they'd be like, what are you talking about? I think we're at that moment. And I think this is the time. I think throughout 2019, we're going to see that mature and the messaging come out and be clear that there are ways to do those things. I think you'll see fewer people next year saying that it's really, really hard. I think internationally you'll still see some, but I think fewer people will say it's really hard to do this a year from now because there'll be more and more examples and it'll get pressed and it'll be evident. So that's what I think where we are.